The gunshot echoed through the desert night, and Eleanor Hayes knew before she even looked up from her basin of water that someone would be bleeding at her door within minutes. She was right. The pounding came hard and desperate, rattling the simple wooden frame of her small house on the edge of Deeming, New Mexico territory. It was August of 1883, and the heat of the day still clung to everything like a second skin, even though the sun had set hours ago. Eleanor dried her hands on her apron and moved quickly to the door, her heart already preparing itself for whatever carnage waited on the other side. When she pulled it open, a man nearly collapsed into her arms. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and bleeding profusely from his side. Behind him stood another man, older, with weather-beaten features and panic in his eyes. "Please," the older man said, his voice cracking. "He needs help. We don't have money, but please, miss, he is dying." Eleanor did not hesitate. She had been a nurse for 3 years now, trained by Dr. Morrison before he passed away last winter. Since then, she had been the only person in Deeming with any real medical knowledge, and she had never once turned anyone away, regardless of their ability to pay. "Bring him inside," she commanded, stepping back to make room. "Lay him on the table. Gently." The two men maneuvered through the doorway, and Eleanor got her first good look at the injured man in the lamplight. He could not have been more than 25, with dark hair matted with sweat and dust, a strong jaw clenched against the pain, and eyes that were starting to glaze over with shock. His clothes were those of a working cowboy, well-worn leather chaps over denim, a shirt that had once been blue but was now mostly red with blood. They laid him on her wooden table, and he groaned, a deep sound that came from somewhere primal. Eleanor immediately began cutting away his shirt, exposing the wound. It was a gunshot, clean entry on his left side, and when she carefully rolled him to check, she saw the exit wound on his back. The bullet had gone straight through, which was good. She would not have to dig for it. "What happened?" she asked, already gathering her supplies: clean cloths, whiskey for disinfecting, needle and thread. "Cattle rustlers," the older man said. "We were driving a small herd to sell in town when they ambushed us at sunset. Ethan here, he is my nephew. He took a bullet meant for me." Ethan. So that was his name. Eleanor looked down at him, at the way his chest heaved with labored breaths, at the pallor spreading across his sun-bronzed skin. He was looking at her now, really looking, and despite the pain he must have been in, there was clarity in his gaze. "Am I going to die?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. Eleanor met his eyes. They were brown, she noticed, the color of rich earth after rain. "Not if I can help it," she said firmly. "But I will not lie to you. This is going to hurt." He nodded just once, and she saw him brace himself. The older man moved to hold Ethan's shoulders down. "Wait," Ethan said, his hand shooting out to grab Eleanor's wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong for someone who had lost so much blood. "If I die, make sure my Uncle Frank gets home safe. Promise me." "You are not going to die," Eleanor repeated, but something in his earnest desperation made her add, "But yes, I promise." Satisfied, Ethan released her and closed his eyes. Eleanor poured whiskey over the wounds, and his body went rigid, every muscle tensing, but he did not cry out. She worked quickly, her hands steady despite the gravity of the situation. She cleaned the wounds thoroughly, checking for any fabric or debris that might cause infection. The bleeding was already starting to slow, which was a good sign. The bullet had missed anything vital. As she began to stitch the exit wound on his back, Frank spoke quietly. "We really do not have money to pay you, miss. Lost most of what we had to those rustlers, but we are good for it, I swear. Soon as we can work again, we will pay you back every cent." "I did not ask for payment," Eleanor said, focused on making neat, even stitches. She had learned that careful work now meant less scarring and faster healing later. I became a nurse to help people, not to get rich. That is mighty kind of you, Frank said, his voice thick with emotion. Not many folks would help a couple of strangers without asking what is in it for them. Eleanor did not respond. She had heard this before, the surprise that she would treat people without demanding payment up front. But she had grown up poor, had watched her own mother die because they could not afford a doctor, and she had vowed then, at 14 years old, that if she ever had the power to heal, she would never let lack of money be the reason someone suffered. She finished the back wound and carefully rolled Ethan onto his side to access the entry wound on his front. His eyes flickered open again, and she could see he was fighting to stay conscious. "Stay with me," she said softly. "Just a little longer." "Trying," he breathed. "You have kind eyes." Despite the situation, Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. "Save your strength. You can flatter me when you are not bleeding on my table." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been a smile, and then his eyes closed again. Eleanor worked faster, stitching him up with practiced efficiency. When she was done, she bandaged both wounds with clean cloth, wrapping it around his torso to hold everything in place. "He needs rest," she told Frank, "and he needs to stay still for at least a week, preferably 2. The stitches need time to heal, and if he tears them, he could start bleeding again." Frank looked around the small house helplessly. "We were staying at the boarding house in town, but like I said, we do not have the money for it now." Eleanor made a decision that she knew was probably foolish but felt right anyway. "He can stay here. I have a spare room. It is small, but it has a bed." "Miss, we could not impose like that," Frank protested, but she could see the relief in his eyes. "You are not imposing, I am offering." Eleanor began cleaning up the bloody cloths and instruments. "Besides, as his nurse, I need to monitor him closely for the next few days. Fever and infection are still risks. It is more practical if he is here." Frank nodded slowly. "You are an angel, miss. I do not know how we will ever repay you." "My name is Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Hayes, and you can repay me by helping me move him to the bed, carefully." Together, they managed to half carry, half drag Ethan to the small room off the main living area. It was barely more than a closet with a narrow bed, a small table, and a window that overlooked the desert, but it was clean and the sheets were fresh. They laid him down gently, and Eleanor covered him with a light blanket despite the heat. In cases of shock and blood loss, keeping the patient warm was important. Ethan was unconscious now, his breathing deep and even. Eleanor checked his pulse. It was weak but steady. She placed a hand on his forehead. No fever yet, but she would need to monitor him closely. Frank stood in the doorway, looking lost. "Should I stay? I can sleep on the floor, help you watch over him." Eleanor considered this. The house was small, and propriety dictated that she should not be alone with 2 strange men. But propriety had never paid much attention to her, and she had never paid much attention to it. Besides, Frank looked exhausted, and she suspected he might have injuries of his own. "Are you hurt?" she asked. He waved a hand dismissively. "Just some bruises, nothing like what Ethan took." "Let me be the judge of that." Eleanor gestured for him to sit at the table in the main room. When he did, she examined him with a critical eye. He was right, mostly. Bruises were already forming on his ribs and arms, and he had a cut on his forehead that needed cleaning, but nothing serious. As she cleaned the cut, Frank talked. "Ethan is my sister's boy. She died when he was 15, fever took her. His father was never in the picture, so I took him in. Taught him everything I know about ranching and cattle. He is like a son to me." Eleanor listened, dabbing at the cut gently. "He seems like a brave young man. Not many people would take a bullet for someone else. He is brave, all right. Too brave sometimes." Frank's voice was rough with affection and worry, always putting himself in danger for others. Got a good heart, that boy. Works harder than anyone I have ever met. What were you doing driving cattle with just the two of you? Eleanor asked. That seems dangerous, even without rustlers, Frank sighed. We had a small ranch up north near Santa Fe, but we had a bad winter last year, lost most of our herd. We were trying to start over, had managed to scrape together enough to buy 20 head. We were bringing them here to Deeming to sell, hoping to make enough to lease some land and start rebuilding. Now. He trailed off, his shoulders sagging. Eleanor felt a pang of sympathy. She knew all about trying to start over with nothing. After her mother died, she had worked as a laundress, then a cook, saving every penny until she could afford to travel to Philadelphia to train as a nurse. It had taken her years of backbreaking work and sacrifice. When she finally returned west, she had chosen Deeming specifically because it was a growing town that needed medical care. You will figure it out, she said, finishing with his cut. Rest now. You can sleep on the sofa. In the morning, we will see how Ethan is doing and make plans from there. Frank looked like he wanted to argue, to insist that he had already imposed too much, but exhaustion won out. He nodded gratefully. Thank you, Eleanor, truly. That first night, Eleanor barely slept. She checked on Ethan every hour, monitoring his temperature, his pulse, the wounds for any signs of fresh bleeding or infection. Each time she entered the small room with her lamp, she found him much the same, unconscious but stable, his breathing steady. In the quiet hours before dawn, she sat beside his bed and studied him in the lamplight. He had a strong face, she thought, the kind that had seen sun and wind and hard work. There were small scars on his hands, the marks of a working man. His hair was longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at the ends where it touched his collar. She found herself wondering what he looked like when he smiled, really smiled, not just that pained twitch she had seen earlier. Eleanor shook her head at herself. This was not professional. He was her patient, nothing more. She had learned early in her training to maintain distance, to see people as bodies that needed healing rather than as individuals with stories and lives. It made the work easier, made the inevitable losses less painful. But there was something about Ethan that made distance difficult. Maybe it was the way he had asked about dying with such calm directness, or the way his first thought had been for his uncle's safety, or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just those earth-brown eyes, and the way they had looked at her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become uncertain. When dawn broke, pink and gold across the desert, Eleanor finally allowed herself to rest. Frank was already awake, sitting at her small table looking uncomfortable. There is coffee, she said, gesturing to the pot she kept warm on the stove. Help yourself. I need to sleep for a few hours, but if anything changes with Ethan, anything at all, wake me immediately. I will, Frank promised. You get some rest. You have earned it. Eleanor went to her own small bedroom and collapsed onto the bed without even removing her shoes. She was asleep within seconds. She woke to voices. Male voices speaking in low tones. For a moment, disoriented, she could not place where she was or what was happening. Then memory flooded back and she was on her feet, moving quickly to the other room. Ethan was awake. He was propped up slightly on the pillows, still pale but alert, talking to Frank in a voice that was weak but coherent. When Eleanor appeared in the doorway, both men looked up. Well, Eleanor said, moving to the bedside. This is a good sign. How are you feeling? Like I got shot, Ethan said, and this time his smile was real if small. Even weak and injured, it transformed his face, adding warmth to those serious features. But alive, thanks to you. Eleanor placed a hand on his forehead. No fever, and his color was already better than it had been during the night. "You are lucky. The bullet missed anything vital, but you are not out of danger yet. Infection is still a risk, and you need to stay still and let those stitches heal." "Frank told me you let us stay here," Ethan said. His eyes were on her face, intent and serious. "And that you did not ask for payment. That is beyond kind, Miss Hayes." "Eleanor," she corrected. "And I told your uncle I became a nurse to help people. Besides, it is practical to keep you here where I can monitor you." "Still," Ethan said, "we owe you everything. My life, certainly. I will find a way to repay you, I swear it." There was something in his voice, a determination that made Eleanor believe him, but she shook her head. "Right now, you owe me nothing except to follow my instructions and heal properly. Can you do that?" "Yes, madam," Ethan said, and she saw a hint of amusement in his eyes despite his obvious pain and weakness. Over the next few days, Eleanor fell into a routine. She would wake early, check on Ethan, change his bandages, make sure he was eating and drinking enough. Then she would go about her other work. She still saw other patients, people from town who came to her door with various ailments and injuries. Frank made himself useful, chopping wood, fixing the fence that had been broken for months, doing small repairs around the house that Eleanor had never had the time or knowledge to handle. And slowly, carefully, Eleanor and Ethan began to talk. At first, it was just small things. He would ask about her day, about the patients she had seen. She would ask about his ranch, about the work he had done before the rustlers attacked. But gradually, the conversations deepened. One afternoon, about 5 days after the shooting, Eleanor was changing his bandages when Ethan spoke quietly. "Frank told me about your mother. I am sorry." Eleanor's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. She rarely spoke about her mother. The grief, even after 8 years, was still sharp. "Thank you," she said simply. "Is that why you became a nurse?" Ethan asked. "Because of what happened to her?" Eleanor finished wrapping the clean bandage around his torso before answering. "Yes," she said finally. "I was 14 when she died. We could not afford a doctor, and the fever just took her. I promised myself that day that I would learn to heal people, and that I would never turn anyone away because they could not pay." Ethan was quiet for a moment. When she looked at him, she saw something like admiration in his eyes. "That is a hard promise to keep, I imagine. People must take advantage of your kindness." "Sometimes," Eleanor admitted, "but more often people are grateful. They help in other ways with food or labor or just kindness when I need it. It works out." "Still," Ethan said, "you are remarkable, Eleanor Hayes." She felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself gathering the soiled bandages. "I am just doing what anyone with a conscience should do." "No," Ethan said firmly. "Most people would not. Most people look out for themselves first and others second, if at all. What you do, what you have done for us, that is special. You are special." Eleanor did not know what to say to that. She fled the room with the excuse of needing to dispose of the bandages, her heart beating faster than it should. As the days passed, Ethan grew stronger. By the end of the first week, he could sit up without help. By the end of the second, he could stand and walk slowly around the room, though it clearly pained him. Eleanor watched his recovery with professional satisfaction, and something else she was trying very hard not to examine too closely. The problem was that the more time she spent with Ethan, the more she liked him. He was thoughtful and kind, patient with his own recovery, even though she could tell he chafed at the inactivity. He had a quiet sense of humor that surprised her, making dry observations about the people and situations she described from her day that made her laugh. And he was interested in her, genuinely interested. He asked about her training, about the cases she found most challenging, about her opinions on everything from politics to literature. when she admitted that she loved to read but rarely had time for it anymore. He asked Frank to bring books from the small lending library in town, and they began reading together in the evenings, taking turns reading aloud. Frank watched all of this with knowing eyes and said nothing, but Eleanor saw the way he smiled when he thought no one was looking. It was during the third week, when Ethan was well enough to sit at the table for meals, that the subject of the future came up. Frank had been into town that day and came back with news. "I found work," he announced. "The McAllister Ranch north of town needs help with their fall roundup. The pay is decent and it will give us a start." "That is wonderful," Eleanor said genuinely. "When do you start?" "Tomorrow," Frank said. "And I found us a room at a boarding house, cheap but clean, so Ethan and I can get out of your hair finally." Eleanor felt something drop in her stomach. Of course, they would leave. Ethan was mostly healed now, and they had already imposed on her kindness for 3 weeks. This was always going to happen. She had known that. "You are sure Ethan is well enough?" she asked, keeping her voice professionally neutral. "The stitches are not quite ready to come out yet." "I can take them out myself in a few days," Ethan said. His voice was carefully neutral too, but when Eleanor looked at him, she saw something complicated in his expression. "You have already done more than enough for us." "Right," Eleanor said. "Of course." "Well, let me check your wounds one more time in the morning before you go, just to be sure everything is healing properly." That night, Eleanor lay in bed and told herself firmly that the heaviness in her chest was just fatigue. She had known Ethan would leave eventually. This was how it was supposed to be. He was her patient and he had recovered, and now he would go back to his life and she would go back to hers. The fact that she had come to look forward to his presence in her house, to their conversations, to the way he looked at her like she was something precious, that was irrelevant. She was a practical woman. She knew better than to let her heart get involved. But when morning came and she checked Ethan's wounds for the last time, her hands trembled slightly. The wounds were healing beautifully, clean and closed with no sign of infection. In another week, the stitches could come out, and in 2, he would be back to full strength. "You have done well," she said, stepping back. "Just be careful not to strain too much too soon. And if you notice any redness, heat, or discharge from the wounds, see a doctor immediately." "I will," Ethan said. He was standing very close to her in the small room, and she was acutely aware of him, of his height, his warmth, the way he was looking at her. "Eleanor, we should go," Frank's voice called from the main room. "Do not want to be late on my first day." The moment broke. Ethan stepped back and Eleanor moved to the door. "Of course," she said. "You should go." They gathered their few belongings and Eleanor walked them to the door. Frank shook her hand firmly. "I will never forget what you did for us, Eleanor. Never. You saved his life and you would not take a cent for it. That is the kind of goodness this world needs more of." "Take care of yourselves," Eleanor said. Then it was Ethan's turn. He stood before her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then he reached out and took her hand in both of his. His palms were rough with calluses, warm and strong. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything. I know I can never truly repay you, but I will find a way to try. I promise you that." "You do not need to," Eleanor said, but her voice came out softer than she intended. "I want to," Ethan said. He held her gaze for a long moment, and Eleanor felt her breath catch. Then he released her hand, and he and Frank were walking away, down the dusty road toward town. Eleanor stood in the doorway and watched them go until they disappeared from sight. Then she went back inside, closed the door, and told herself firmly that the emptiness in her house was just because she had gotten used to having people around. It had nothing to do with Ethan specifically. She almost believed it. The next week was strange. Eleanor went about her normal routine, seeing patients, tending to the various ailments and injuries that brought people to her door. She cleaned the small room where Ethan had stayed, washing the sheets and airing out the space. She tried to settle back into her solitary life. But everything felt different now. The house felt too quiet. She found herself listening for Ethan's voice, for the sound of him moving around in the other room. She caught herself setting the table for 3 instead of 1. At night, she would pick up the book they had been reading together and then put it down again, unable to continue without him. This was foolish, she told herself. She had known him for 3 weeks. That was no time at all, and most of that time he had been her patient. Whatever she thought she felt was probably just the natural connection between healer and patient, nothing more. But then, why did her chest ache when she thought about never seeing him again? Why did she find herself looking toward town whenever she stepped outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of him? On the 8th day after Ethan left, there was a knock at her door just after sunset. Eleanor opened it to find a young boy, maybe 10 years old, standing on her step. "Miss Hayes," he asked, "I am supposed to give you this." He held out a folded piece of paper. Eleanor took it, confused. The boy tipped his hat and ran off before she could ask any questions. She unfolded the paper and recognized immediately that the handwriting was Ethan's. She had seen it in the notes he sometimes left for her when she was out seeing patients, little messages about how he was feeling or what Frank had brought back from town. "Eleanor," the note read, "please come to the old cottonwood tree by the river at sunset tomorrow. I have something important to discuss with you. Ethan." Eleanor read the note 3 times, her heart beating hard. What could he possibly need to discuss? Was something wrong with his wounds? But if that were the case, he would just come to the house, not ask her to meet him by the river. She barely slept that night, her mind spinning through possibilities. By the time sunset approached the next day, she had changed her dress twice and redone her hair 3 times, all while telling herself that this was probably nothing, that she was being ridiculous. The old cottonwood tree was about a mile outside of town, a massive ancient thing that stood alone on the bank of the Mimbers River. It was a well-known landmark, a place where people sometimes came for picnics or to escape the heat. As Eleanor approached, she saw Ethan standing beneath the tree, waiting. He was dressed in clean clothes, his hair neatly combed, and when he saw her, his face broke into a smile that made her heart skip. "You came," he said as she drew near. "I was not sure you would." "Your note said it was important," Eleanor replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is something wrong with your wounds?" "No," Ethan said. "My wounds are healing perfectly, thanks to you. This is about something else." He gestured to the base of the tree, and Eleanor saw that he had spread out a blanket and set out what looked like a simple picnic: bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of what might be cider. "I wanted to thank you properly," Ethan explained, "for everything you did for us, for me. I know a picnic is not much, but it is a start." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. "Ethan, you did not need to do this. I told you I do not expect payment." "I know," Ethan said, "but that is exactly why I wanted to do it. Please sit with me, just for a little while." Eleanor hesitated for only a moment before nodding. They sat down on the blanket, and Ethan began laying out the food. His movements were still a bit careful, she noticed, still protecting his side, but he was clearly much stronger than he had been. "How is the work at the McAllister ranch?" Eleanor asked, accepting a piece of bread. "Hard but good," Ethan replied. "The pay is fair and Mr. McAllister seems like a decent man. Frank is happy to be working again." He paused, then added quietly, "But I have missed you. I have missed our talks." Eleanor's breath caught. "I have missed them too," she admitted before she could stop herself. Ethan turned to look at her fully. The setting sun cast golden light across his face, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw, the warmth in his eyes. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. I have been thinking about it constantly since I left your house, and I realized that if I did not say it, I would regret it for the rest of my life." Eleanor's heart was pounding now. "What is it?" "These past 3 weeks, getting to know you, seeing your kindness and your strength and your intelligence, it has meant everything to me. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. And I know that I was just a patient to you, someone you helped out of the goodness of your heart, but for me, it was more than that. You are more than that." He reached out and took her hand gently. "I am falling in love with you, Eleanor. Maybe I have already fallen. I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a cowboy trying to rebuild after losing everything. But whatever I have, whatever I am, I want to give it to you. If you will have it, if you will have me." Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling. She had not expected this, had not let herself even hope for it. But now that he had said it, now that the truth was out in the open, she realized that she felt the same way. Somewhere between tending his wounds and reading together by lamplight, somewhere between his quiet strength and his genuine kindness, she had fallen in love with him too. "You were never just a patient to me," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I tried to tell myself you were, tried to maintain distance the way I was taught to, but I could not. Every day I looked forward to seeing you, to talking with you, and when you left, my house felt empty. I felt empty." She squeezed his hand. "I love you too, Ethan. I do not know when it happened or how, but I do." The smile that spread across Ethan's face was like sunrise, bright and full of promise. "You mean it, truly." "Truly," Eleanor said. And then he was leaning in and she was too, and they were kissing beneath the old cottonwood tree as the sun set over the New Mexico desert. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I have nothing to offer you right now," Ethan said seriously. "No home, no land, just wages from ranch work, but I am going to change that. I am going to work hard and save every penny, and I am going to build something worthy of you." "I do not need grand gestures," Eleanor said. "I just need you. Your heart, your honesty, your kindness. That is enough." "It is not enough for me," Ethan said firmly. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. You gave me my life back. I want to give you the world, Eleanor, and I am going to spend every day trying." They sat together under the tree as the stars came out, talking and planning and dreaming. Ethan told her about his hopes for the future, about wanting to own land again someday, to build a ranch that would last. Eleanor told him about her work, about wanting to build a real clinic in Deeming, a place where people could come for care regardless of their means. "We could do both," Ethan said thoughtfully. "A ranch could support a clinic, and you would be close to town, able to see patients." "That is a lovely dream," Eleanor said softly. "It is more than a dream," Ethan said. "It is a promise. I am going to make it happen." When Ethan finally walked Eleanor back to her house that night, he kissed her again at the door, and she went inside feeling lighter than she had in years. For so long she had focused only on her work, on helping others. She had not let herself think about her own happiness, her own future. But now, with Ethan, she could see a different kind of life opening up before her. A life with love and partnership and shared dreams. Over the following months, Eleanor and Ethan courted properly. He would come to see her whenever he had free time, which was not as often as either of them would have liked. Ranch work was demanding, especially during roundup season. But when he did come, they made the most of every moment. Sometimes they would walk together through town, and Eleanor would introduce him to the people she knew, the patients she had treated. Ethan was always respectful and kind, and people took to him quickly. Other times, they would ride out into the desert together. Ethan borrowed a gentle mare for Eleanor, and they would explore the landscape, talking about everything and nothing. Frank was delighted by their relationship. "I knew it," he told Eleanor one Sunday when he and Ethan came for dinner. "I saw the way you two looked at each other, even when Ethan was half dead on your table. There was something there." Eleanor blushed, but Ethan just grinned and squeezed her hand under the table. As autumn turned to winter, Ethan began to talk more concretely about his plans. He had been saving every cent he earned, living as frugally as possible. Frank was doing the same. Together, they had a goal: to save enough to lease land and buy cattle to start their ranch over again. "How long do you think it will take?" Eleanor asked one evening. They were sitting on her small porch, wrapped in blankets against the December chill. "Another 6 months, maybe 8, Ethan said. "If we can get through the winter without any unexpected expenses, it is not much, but it will be enough to start small. 20 head of cattle, maybe 30 if we are lucky, and a small plot of land east of town where we can graze them." "And then," Eleanor prompted. "And then we build," Ethan said simply. "Slowly, carefully, we grow the herd, we improve the land. In a few years, we will have something real. Something that can last." He turned to look at her, his expression serious in the lamplight spilling from the window. "And I will ask you to marry me properly, with a ring and everything, when I can offer you a real home, not just dreams and promises." Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Ethan, I would marry you tomorrow if you asked. I do not need a ring or a home, I just need you." "I know," Ethan said softly, "but I need to do this right. You deserve that, you deserve everything." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that he was being foolish, that what mattered was love and commitment, not material things. But she also understood what was driving him. He was a man who had lost everything and been saved by her generosity. He needed to prove to himself and to her that he could build something, that he was worthy of what she had given him, so she kissed him and said, "I will wait. But not because I need grand gestures, because I love you and I respect what you need to do." That winter was hard. The work at the McAllister Ranch slowed during the coldest months, which meant less pay for Ethan and Frank. Eleanor continued her nursing work, but winter was slow for her too. Fewer people ventured out in the cold unless they absolutely had to. They supported each other through it. Eleanor would make hearty stews and soups, inviting Ethan and Frank to share her meals, refusing to let them pay. Ethan would bring firewood that he cut in his spare time, keeping her warm through the cold nights. They were building a life together in small, practical ways, and Eleanor found that she treasured these quiet moments as much as any grand romantic gesture. It was in February, on a day when snow was actually falling on the New Mexico desert, a rare and beautiful sight, that something unexpected happened. Eleanor was tending to a patient, a woman who had cut her hand badly while cooking, when there was a commotion outside. She heard shouting, and then suddenly Ethan burst through her door. He was supposed to be at the ranch. Eleanor's heart leaped into her throat. Was he injured? But no, he was grinning, his face flushed with cold and excitement. "Eleanor," he said, slightly out of breath. "I need you to come with me, right now." "I am with a patient," Eleanor said, even as she finished wrapping the woman's hand. "What is this about? Just trust me," Ethan said. "Please." The patient, a kind older woman named Mrs. Chen, waved her good hand. "Go on, dear, I can see myself out. This young man looks like he has something important to tell you." Eleanor let Ethan take her hand and lead her outside. Frank was waiting there with horses, 3 of them. Eleanor recognized the mare she usually rode. "What is going on?" she asked. "Get on," Ethan said, still grinning. "I will explain on the way." Confused but trusting, Eleanor mounted the mare. The 3 of them rode out of town, heading east. The snow was still falling lightly, dusting the desert landscape in white, making everything look magical and strange. After about 20 minutes, they crested a small rise and Ethan reined in his horse. "There," he said, pointing. "That is ours." Eleanor followed his gesture and saw a plot of land stretching out before them. It was not huge, maybe 40 acres, but it had good grazing grass, a small stream running through it, and a stand of cottonwood trees at the northern edge. "What do you mean, ours?" Eleanor asked, her heart beginning to pound. "I mean we bought it," Frank said, riding up beside them. "Well, Ethan did. Paid for it outright, not just a lease. This land belongs to him now." Eleanor turned to Ethan, her eyes wide. "How? You said it would take months more to save enough." Ethan dismounted and came to help her down from her horse. When her feet were on the ground, he took both her hands in his. "I was going to wait," he said. "I was going to save for months more, maybe a year, so I could buy land and cattle and build a house so I could give you everything you deserve. But then I realized something." He pulled her closer. "You already gave me everything. My life, my health, my future. You gave it all to me without asking for anything in return. And here I was, making you wait so I could give you things back, as if our relationship was a transaction that needed to be balanced." "Ethan," Eleanor started, but he shook his head. "Let me finish. I talked to Frank and we realized that we had been thinking about this all wrong. We did not need to save until we could do everything at once. We could start now with what we had. So we took all our savings, everything we had, and we bought this land. It is not much, but it is real. It is a start. And more importantly, it is proof that I am serious about building a future with you." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket. When his hand emerged, he was holding a simple gold band. It was not fancy, but it was clearly real gold, warm and glowing even in the gray winter light. "This was my mother's," Ethan said quietly. "The only thing of hers that Frank managed to save. He gave it to me this morning." Ethan dropped to one knee in the snow, still holding Eleanor's hand. "Eleanor Hayes, you saved my life and asked for nothing, so I am giving you everything I have. This land, this ring, my heart, my future, all of it. Will you marry me?" Eleanor felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Ethan stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and Frank was whooping and hollering behind them, and snow was falling all around them like a blessing. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan said, "There is more. Come on, I want to show you where we are going to build the house." They walked across the land together, Ethan pointing out his plans. The house would go here, near the cottonwoods for shade in the summer. The barn would be there, close enough to be convenient but far enough that the smell would not reach the house. They would fence this area for the cattle when they could afford to buy them. And there, on the southern edge, closest to town, that would be Eleanor's clinic. "Your clinic." Eleanor repeated. "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "We will build it together. A real medical clinic with proper equipment and space for patients to recover if they need to. You can continue your work, helping people, and the ranch will support it. Everything I have, everything we build, it is all for both of us. That is what marriage is, right? Partnership." Eleanor looked around at the land, at this man who had come into her life bleeding and desperate and had somehow become the center of her world. "We should get married soon," she said. "I do not want to wait." "Neither do I," Ethan agreed. "How about next month? That will give us time to plan something small but nice." "Next month," Eleanor agreed. They were married in March of 1884 in the small church in Deeming. Eleanor wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that she sewed herself, with lace at the collar that she had been saving for years. Ethan wore his best suit, and Frank stood up beside him as best man. Mrs. Chen and several of Eleanor's other patients came to witness the ceremony. as did the McAllisters and some of the other ranchers Ethan and Frank had worked with. It was a small wedding but full of warmth and love. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Ethan kissed her, Eleanor felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was what she had been missing all those years of solitary work and sacrifice. Not just love, but partnership, someone to build a life with. They had no money for a honeymoon or even a wedding trip. Instead, they spent their first night as husband and wife in Eleanor's small house in town. The next day, they began the work of building their future. The first months of marriage were hard work but joyful. Ethan and Frank started constructing a small house on their land, working every spare moment they had. Eleanor continued her nursing work, but now she had help. Ethan would often accompany her on calls, carrying her supplies, helping lift patients who needed moving, providing an extra pair of hands. In the evenings, exhausted from their respective labors, Eleanor and Ethan would sit together and plan their future. They made lists of what they needed: lumber for the house, nails, glass for windows, furniture, seeds for a garden, and eventually cattle to start the herd. "It is going to take years," Ethan said one night, lying in bed beside her. "Years of hard work before we have something that can really sustain us." "I know," Eleanor said, "but we will do it together. That makes all the difference." By summer, the house was finished. It was small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was solid and well built. They had a real stove for cooking and heating, glass windows that let in light, and a bed that Ethan had built himself. To Eleanor, who had lived in cramped rented rooms for most of her adult life, it felt like a palace. They moved in on a Saturday in July. Frank, who had decided to stay on at the McAllister Ranch rather than try ranching again, came to help them move their few possessions. As Eleanor stood in the doorway of her new home, looking out across the land that was now theirs, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. "Happy?" Ethan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "So happy," Eleanor said, leaning back against him. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is real, that we are real." "We are real," Ethan assured her, "and this is just the beginning." He was right. Over the next year, they built and grew and worked. Ethan took whatever jobs he could find, ranch work mostly, while also improving their own land. He built a barn, put up fences, dug a well so they would have water closer to the house. Eleanor continued her nursing work, riding into Deeming several times a week to see patients. She charged those who could afford it and treated those who could not for free, just as she always had. By their first anniversary, they had saved enough to buy 10 head of cattle. It was not the 30 they had hoped for, but it was a start. Ethan was so proud the day they arrived, watching the cattle graze on their land, the beginning of their herd. "Next year we will double this," he told Eleanor. "In 5 years we will have 100 head. In 10, maybe more." Eleanor smiled at his enthusiasm. She loved seeing him like this, full of hope and ambition. But she also made sure he remembered to live in the present, to appreciate what they had right now. "We have each other," she would remind him. "That is what matters most." "I know," Ethan would always say. "And I am grateful every single day. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that made grazing hard, and winter storms that killed some of their cattle. Eleanor had difficult cases, patients she could not save no matter how hard she tried. There were times when money was tight, when they had to choose between buying supplies for the ranch or medicine for Eleanor's work. But they faced every challenge together. When times were hard, they supported each other. When they succeeded, they celebrated together. They built a life that was rich in love and purpose, even when it was poor in material wealth. It was in the spring of their 2nd year of marriage that Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited until she was certain before telling Ethan. When she finally did, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby." "Really, really," Eleanor confirmed, laughing too. "Put me down, you are going to make me dizzy." Ethan set her down gently, then immediately became concerned. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to sit down? Should you be working? Maybe you should rest more." "I am fine," Eleanor assured him. "I am a nurse, remember. I know how to take care of myself. And I am going to keep working as long as I can. We need the income and my patients need me." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue but knew better. Instead, he placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child," he said wonderingly. "I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Eleanor said, covering his hand with hers. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Eleanor continued her nursing work well into her 7th month, only stopping when she became too large to comfortably ride into town. Even then, people came to her, bringing their ailments and injuries to the ranch. Ethan was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest, making sure she ate enough, worrying over every small twinge or discomfort. Eleanor found it endearing, if sometimes exasperating. Their son was born on a cold January night in 1886. Eleanor's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when she was frightened, when she worried that something would go wrong. But Ethan was there beside her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, giving her strength when she felt she had none left. When the baby finally came, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Ethan wept openly. "He is beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are so strong, Eleanor, so brave." They named him Thomas after Eleanor's father, whom she barely remembered. Tommy, they called him, and he was the light of their lives. Ethan was a devoted father, taking over as many of Eleanor's chores as he could so she could focus on nursing the baby. He would walk the floor with Tommy at night when the baby could not sleep, singing old cowboy ballads in his rough voice. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it until it was smooth and safe, carving designs into the wood. Eleanor watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. This was what he had promised her, she realized. Not wealth or grand gestures, but this. A family, a home, a life built on love and hard work and mutual respect. As Tommy grew, so did the ranch. By his 2nd birthday, they had 30 head of cattle, and Ethan was able to hire occasional help during busy seasons. Eleanor had converted one of the rooms in their house into a proper examining room, with a real medical table and cabinets for supplies. She still rode into town for emergencies, but more and more people came to her. They were beginning to be prosperous, not rich, but comfortable. They could afford small luxuries now. Books for Eleanor, a new saddle for Ethan, toys for Tommy. But neither of them forgot where they had started, and they both remained committed to helping others. Eleanor still treated patients who could not pay, and Ethan was known for helping neighboring ranchers when they faced hardships, lending cattle for breeding or offering work to men who needed it. "We were helped when we had nothing," Ethan would say. "It is our responsibility to help others now." When Tommy was 3, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter, Grace, was born on a warm summer evening with much less drama than her brother's arrival. She had Eleanor's green eyes and Ethan's dark hair, and she was a calm, sweet baby from the start. With 2 children and a growing ranch, life was busy. But it was also full and joyful. Eleanor reduced her nursing work, only taking cases that were urgent or that came to her. Ethan continued to build the ranch, and by 1890 they had over 50 head of cattle and had hired 2 permanent ranch hands. On their 6th anniversary, Ethan had a surprise for Eleanor. He had been working on something in secret, he told her, and now it was ready. He led her to the southern edge of their property where a new building stood. It was small but well made, with a sign over the door that read, Hayes Clinic. "You built me a clinic," Eleanor said, her voice full of wonder. "I promised you I would," Ethan said. "It took longer than I wanted, but here it is. A real clinic, separate from our home, where you can see patients properly. There is an examining room, a room for recovery if people need to stay overnight, and a small office for your records and supplies." Eleanor walked through the building, running her hands over the walls that Ethan had built, the furniture he had made or bought, the medical supplies he must have spent weeks gathering. "This must have cost so much," she said. "We can afford it," Ethan said. "The ranch is doing well. And this was always part of the plan, remember? Your clinic supported by our ranch. I am just sorry it took so long." Eleanor turned to him, tears in her eyes. "It is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much, Ethan Lawson." "I love you too," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. "Everything I have is because of you. Because you saved me when I had nothing. Because you loved me when I had nothing to offer. This clinic, this ranch, our children, our life, all of it exists because you were kind to a dying cowboy." "You were never just a dying cowboy to me," Eleanor said. "Even then, even at the beginning, you were special." The Hayes Clinic opened officially that spring. Word spread quickly that there was a real medical facility in Deeming, run by a skilled nurse who charged fairly and never turned anyone away. Eleanor's practice grew, and she was able to help more people than ever before. She trained 2 young women who wanted to learn nursing, passing on the knowledge that Dr. Morrison had given her. She established connections with doctors in larger towns, consulting with them on difficult cases. She became known throughout the territory as someone who could be trusted, who had skill and compassion in equal measure. And through it all, Ethan was her partner. He managed the ranch and supported her work, taking care of the children when she had to attend to a patient, helping with the clinic however he could. They had built something remarkable together, a life that served both their needs and the needs of their community. As the years passed, their family grew. Another son, William, was born in 1892, and a daughter, Rose, in 1894. Their ranch grew too, expanding to over 100 head of cattle and 200 acres of land. They were successful by any measure, respected in the community, comfortable in their finances. But what Eleanor treasured most was not the success, or the respect, or the comfort. It was the quiet moments. Ethan reading to the children by lamplight, his deep voice bringing stories to life. Family dinners around the table they had built together, full of laughter and conversation. Evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over land they had turned from desert into home. One evening in 1897, when Tommy was 11 and Rose was 3, Eleanor and Ethan sat together on that porch while the children played in the yard. They were both in their 30s now, their faces marked by sun and wind and hard work, but still young, still strong. "Do you remember that first night?" Ethan asked. "When Frank brought me to your door, bleeding and half dead?" "Of course," Eleanor said. "I thought you were going to die on my table. I probably would have without you." Ethan took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. "I had nothing then. Nothing but Frank and a handful of stolen cattle that the rustlers took anyway, and you helped me anyway. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything," Eleanor corrected. "Your love, this life, our family, that is everything that matters." "We gave each other everything," Ethan said. "That is what love is, I think. Not keeping score, not worrying about who owes what, just giving everything you have and trusting it will be enough. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. It is more than enough, it is perfect. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Eleanor thought about that night 14 years ago when a bleeding cowboy and his desperate uncle had appeared at her door. She had helped him without thought of payment, just as she had been trained to do, just as her heart had demanded. She could never have imagined then where that simple act of kindness would lead. To love, to marriage, to children, to a life so full and rich that sometimes she could hardly believe it was real. But it was real. All of it, from the land beneath their feet to the children in the yard to the man beside her. It was real, and it was theirs, built from nothing but hard work and love and the simple decision to help someone in need. As the years continued to pass, the Hayes Ranch became one of the most successful in the region. But it was known for more than just its prosperity. It was known as a place where people could come if they needed help, where a meal was always available for those who were hungry, where medical care was given freely to those who could not pay. Tommy grew into a thoughtful young man who wanted to be a doctor. Eleanor and Ethan encouraged him, saving money to send him to medical school back east. Grace became a teacher, opening a small school on their land for the children of ranch workers and nearby families. William took to ranching naturally, learning everything Ethan could teach him about cattle and land management. Rose, the baby, showed signs of having inherited both her mother's healing touch and her father's business sense. Eleanor continued her nursing work well into her 50s, finally training enough nurses that she could step back and oversee rather than do all the work herself. The Hayes Clinic had become a real hospital by then, with several beds and multiple staff members, serving not just Deeming but the entire surrounding region. Ethan remained active in the ranch until his 60s, then gradually handed over the daily operations to William while he focused on mentoring young ranchers and supporting Eleanor's medical work. He never forgot what it felt like to have nothing, to be dependent on someone else's kindness, and he made sure that their ranch was always a place where people could find help. Frank lived to see all 4 of the children grown, passing away peacefully in his sleep at 73. He had remained close to Eleanor and Ethan throughout his life, a beloved uncle to their children, a constant reminder of where they had started. On their 30th anniversary, Eleanor and Ethan took a trip together, leaving the ranch in William's capable hands. They traveled to Santa Fe, something they had never had the time or money to do before. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, visited museums and markets. But what Eleanor remembered most from that trip was not the sights or the experiences. It was a quiet moment in their hotel room when Ethan pulled her close and said, "I would do it all again, you know. Get shot, lose everything, show up bleeding at your door. If I knew it would lead to this to you, I would do it 1,000 times over." "Do not say that," Eleanor said, but she was smiling. "I do not ever want to see you hurt again." "You know what I mean," Ethan said. "That night changed my life. You changed my life. Everything good that has happened since then is because of you." "Because of us," Eleanor corrected. "We built this life together, Ethan. It took both of us." "Together," Ethan agreed. "Always together." They returned to Deeming and to their ranch, to their family and their work. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and sorrows that come with any long life. They lost friends, celebrated weddings and births, weathered storms both literal and figurative. Tommy did become a doctor, returning to Deeming after his training to work at his mother's clinic. Grace married a teacher from Santa Fe and had 3 children. William married the daughter of a neighboring rancher and took over the ranch completely, expanding it even further. Rose, surprising everyone, became a lawyer, one of the first women in New Mexico territory to do so. Eleanor and Ethan became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They aged together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love remaining constant. They had started with nothing but a cowboy's wounds and a nurse's kindness, and they had built an empire of love and family and service. On a warm spring evening in 1920, when Eleanor was 63 and Ethan 67, they sat together on the porch of their home. It was the same home they had built almost 40 years earlier, though it had been expanded and improved many times over the years. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked. It was a question he had not asked in many years. "Helping me that night, taking us in when we could not pay. I know your life would have been simpler without me." Eleanor took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his the way they had thousands of times before. "Simpler, yes," she said, "but not better, never better. You are my greatest adventure, Ethan Lawson. You and our children and this life we have built. I would not trade it for anything." "I gave you everything I owned," Ethan said, "just like I promised I would." "And I gave you everything I had," Eleanor replied. "My heart, my life, my future. We gave each other everything and we created something beautiful." They sat together as the sun set, surrounded by the land they had nurtured, knowing their children and grandchildren were scattered across the property and the town, carrying on the legacy they had built. A legacy of hard work and kindness, of love freely given and gratefully received. The nurse had tended his wounds without payment, and the cowboy had given her everything he owned. But the truth was more complicated and more beautiful than that simple statement. They had given each other everything, not in a single grand gesture, but in thousands of small moments over decades of life together. In work shared and sorrows comforted and joys celebrated. In the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eleanor rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, and they sat in perfect contentment, knowing that they had been blessed beyond measure. Not with wealth, though that had come. Not with success, though they had achieved it, but with love, true and lasting, that had carried them through everything. That was the real gift they had given each other all those years ago. Not life for death, not payment for service, but love. Simple, complicated, difficult, easy, painful, joyful love. The kind of love that builds empires and families and legacies. The kind of love that lasts. And it did last, through all their remaining years together, until Eleanor passed away peacefully at 71, surrounded by her family with Ethan holding her hand. And when Ethan followed her just 6 months later, it was with a smile on his face, because he knew he would see her again. They were buried together on their land, under the cottonwood trees near where Ethan had proposed all those years ago. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren came to pay their respects, and the Hayes Ranch and Clinic continued to operate, a testament to what two people could build when they gave everything to each other. The story of the nurse who tended the cowboy's wounds without payment, and how he gave her everything he owned, became part of Deeming's history. But those who knew the true story understood that it was not about payment or gifts. It was about love, pure and simple. The kind of love that changes everything, that builds everything, that becomes everything. And in the end, that love was more than enough. It was everything they needed, everything they wanted, everything they had dreamed of on that first night when a bleeding cowboy appeared at a nurse's door and two lives became one. Their great-grandchildren still work the land today, still run the clinic, still tell the story of Eleanor and Ethan, the nurse and the cowboy who built something beautiful from nothing but kindness and love. And every young couple in the family is told on their wedding day the same thing: give each other everything. Not because you owe it, but because love demands nothing less. And if you do, if you give freely and completely, you will build something that lasts forever. That was the legacy Eleanor and Ethan left behind. Not land or money or success, though those things mattered, but the understanding that true wealth is measured in love given and received, in lives touched and helped, in families built and nurtured. That was what mattered. That was what lasted. And so the story ends as it began, with an act of kindness. A nurse opening her door to a dying man. A cowboy promising to give everything he owned. And both of them discovering that everything they needed was right there in front of them in each other, waiting to be found. Waiting to be built into something beautiful, something lasting, something perfect, the end.